Hello, I'm Chrissy Seaton. My video today is called Quilts Lost. It is the righteous thing to do to return lost property, particularly if you are able to track down the previous owner or the person who lost it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, with the flavour of quilts in the background, which we'll talk about a little bit later also. Within the 7 Noahide laws, the prohibition of theft is a very extensive study. There are many laws on what we can and can't do. And included in that, of course, is the directions regarding lost property or abandoned items, including real estate. The Torah Law describes very clearly where we stand from a Noahide point of view. And to reference the Divine Code, the 3rd edition by Rabbi Moshe Weiner, there is a section that deals with this very thing about lost objects and items. And that comes in on page 638. And it's under the heading of Laws of Ownless Items and Finding Lost Objects. Now, in particular, so if you have a copy of this or you can access it online, please go and read this chapter 15 because it's quite extensive and far too extensive to discuss entirely in this video. But I also draw your attention to page 641, and the footnote is 473. And right down at the very last sentence in that footnote, it says, therefore, after all discussion has taken place, it says, therefore, the cases mentioned in the main text, one should return a found object to its owner if he knows who that is, in order to fulfill his obligation in God's eyes, even though that is not strictly required. So we're going to expand a little bit on this with the example of the quilts. So what is the prohibition of theft? Well, it briefly, very briefly, it says that's basically respecting another person's property as though it was yours in terms of care and responsibility. So you're to ensure also that any benefits that you receive are not at the unfair expense of someone else. So must always be mindful of that, particularly when dealing with lost property or found property. And the law is quite clear on that in Torah, and I'm going to actually read that to you. And we're going to go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 to 17. And this is in the Garden of Eden, and I'll read it. And Hashem God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but the tree of knowledge of good and bad you must not eat thereof, for on the day you eat of it you shall surely die. Now that doesn't mean in the physical sense there, and I'm going to read the explanation. Adam was to work the garden, this is the explanation. Adam was to work the garden through the study of Torah and the performance of positive commandments, and to guard it by refraining from forbidden activities. This means that man's task in this world is to serve God. If he does that, then his material needs will be satisfied as Adam's were in Eden. For to think that only physical exertion can bring success is to believe in an illusion. Verse 17, the explanation continues. For on the day you eat of it, on that day, the evil impulses of jealousy, lust, and honor will be aroused within you, making it impossible for you to attain the goal of complete spirituality. As long as you are still on earth, spirituality, as long as you are still on earth, thus eternal life will be an intolerable burden for you. And then it goes on, you shall surely die. Since Adam lived to the age of 930, it is clear that he was not to die as soon as he ate the fruit. Rather, he would become subject to death, whereas if he had never sinned, his holiness would have kept him alive forever. Now, that is where the origin of theft begins, because in actual fact, they were told, Adam and Eve were told not to eat from that tree. And of course, before the sun set on the day, they did. And so that, in a sense, is they were thieving. They were told not to touch that, and they did. So there's the original foundation about the consequences of theft. The other verse I want to read to you is also, it's in Genesis chapter 21, and I think it's verse 25. Yes, 21, chapter 21, verse 25. And Abraham disputed with Abimelech regarding the well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. Now, the explanation of this I will read here. It says, then Abraham disputed. Although the peace-loving Abraham agreed to enter into the alliance, he seized the opportunity to state a grievance regarding a disputed well. For as the Midrash notes, reproof leads to peace. And comment says that Abraham rebuked Abimelech for tolerating flagrant violence in his country. So that was regarding a theft, the ownership of a well or access to the well. So again, we have two, very early in Torah, we have two quite vivid examples there of the prohibition of theft. So moving along, I want to just explain the reason these quilts are hanging in the background there. I have I was never blessed with a daughter, although I have a gorgeous granddaughter, but I have two beautiful daughter-in-laws, and I love them dearly. And they both love patchwork quilts. But one in particular, she rescued two patchwork quilts. She was in an op shop. She's a very good bargain hunter, and she saw these two beautiful quilts. On two separate occasions this happened. And she thought, I've got to have that, take that home to Grandma. So I ended up with two quilts she had bought through an op shop. And now they have two different stories from my point of view. But of course, every quilt tells a story. And I just want to show you, this first one is, it says hearts that share are hearts that care. And isn't that gorgeous? And it's this gorgeous little animals, a chook with the bow on her head. And look at the cat in shock when it sees mice. So it's obviously not going to chase the mice. But it is absolutely gorgeous, and it's obviously been made, I would say, with the thoughts of it going to a child or I'd say a female child or a young person. But luckily, the persons who made this quilt put a label on it. Every quilter must label their quilt in case it does get lost or someone 100 years down the track wants to know who made it. And fortunately for me, the label is here, and I'm going to read it. It says, made by Daff Parker and Helen Ho, Pilton Craft Group, 2004. Now, Pilton's not that far away. It's the other side of Toowoomba. So when the COVID-19 businesses were able to travel more freely, I'm going to see if I can get in touch with these ladies. Pilton's not a big town. It'd have to be someone that knows someone. And I would say these two ladies probably made this quilt for some sort of charity or something, I don't know. But it ended up in an op shop, someone had kind of abandoned it. So I just feel it would be nice to contact those ladies and say, hey, look, I found your beautiful quilt. The other one, pardon my back, is not so fortunate for me and for whoever made it, because this has no label whatsoever. This is an absolutely beautiful quilt. Someone has put hours and hours of red work embroidery into each of those panels and sewn it together, quilted it together. A beautiful, beautiful work of art, and there is no evidence of it ever having been labelled. So I'm hoping someone might be watching this video today that might recognise this quilt or recognise who may have made it. It would be in Australia, I imagine. And if you do know something about this quilt or some way I can return it, please go to my website, My Noahide Family, and you'll locate my email address. Email me. I would be very happy indeed if I could find its rightful owner. But in the meantime, both these quilts are in a loving, caring environment in my house at the moment. But I would like to be able to have the original makers have those back. I think it's important. So as a Noahide, it is the righteous thing to do, to make every effort to return a lost item. Now, there are times when it can't be. You know, if you're walking along the street and you see a $20 bill just blowing along the street and it's not, you know, you can pick it up. It's probably slipped out of someone's pocket. You could probably spend all your life looking for the rightful owner and never find it. And, you know, people often, if they pick up money, they put it in a charity box or something like that. But, you know, things that I see these quilts as quite valuable in terms of the love and the time and the cost that's gone into making them. To me, they're of value. They're of important value to the person who made it and to the person who was ultimately to be the recipient of it. So they weren't given directly to me, but thankfully my beautiful daughter-in-law rescued them and brought them to me to look after until I find someone who owns them. So it is the righteous thing to do, to make an effort to return lost objects. Now, the Torah laws about lost and found and abandoned items are meticulous. I mean meticulous. And so Noahides need to be aware of what we are required to do. There are things we're not responsible or required to do regarding lost and found or abandoned objects. But the summary at the end of the discussion or the laws is that if it's possible for you to return something that you've found, a lost item, etc., then it's pleasing in the eyes of God that you make every effort to return it to the rightful person. So I think it's pleasing for God. We need to be aware of what's required. Doesn't mean because we're not commanded to do it that it isn't, that there aren't righteous obligations that we as a Noahide have. And it is a matter of principles. We all know ourselves when we lose something. It's a joyous occasion if you find it or if someone returns it. So we must be mindful of that, how we treat our fellow man. Please subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed it, and please remember that always as a Noahide, act and speak in a manner that's pleasing to our loving Father. Please take care and God bless.